I will now be presenting the resolution to observe the Kashmir Black Day. Whereas the state of Jammu and Kashmir is under illegal Indian occupation since October 27, 1947, it is internationally recognized as disputed territory. On August 5th, 2019, India unilaterally abrogated Articles 370 and 35A. Under Article 370, Jammu and Kashmir had enjoyed some measure of autonomy pending final resolution of the state's future, and Article 35A prohibited non-Kashmiris from acquiring property or land in the state. On March 31st, 2020, amid the COVID-19 pandemic, the Indian government introduced a new domicile law. This law is aimed at demographic change and at taking the land and resources from the indigenous population of Jammu and Kashmir. This law is counter to the United Nations Security Council Resolutions 47, 91, 96, 98, 122, and 126 that call for a plebiscite to determine the future of the disputed territory. Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention states, "The occupying power shall not transfer its own civilian population into territory it occupies." And Article 1, all high contracting parties, which includes Canada, are required to take action to ensure respect for the Convention in all circumstances. The overall situation has dangerously worsened as India continues to deny fundamental rights of expression, communication, and information, with even health professionals unable to access urgently required information as they respond to COVID-19. We, the participants of this seminar, citizens and residents of Canada, therefore resolve, number one, condemn the government of India's domicile law and its settlement colonization underway in Jammu and Kashmir. Number two, demand that India ends preemptive imprisonment and free all political prisoners. Number three, insist upon India's compliance with international legal obligations. And number four, pledge to proactively work with Canadian civil society groups and the United Nations to realize implementation of self-determination for the people of Jammu and Kashmir. For all those who agree with the resolutions, please raise your hand. And if you oppose, please raise your hand. So the motion passes. We'll now have Brother Zafar Bangash to present some word of thanks.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for coming out today to express solidarity with our brothers and sisters in India's illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, where, as we heard, a lot of terrible things are happening to our brothers and sisters over there. But it is our moral, legal, political, and social responsibility that we do not leave our brothers and sisters in Kashmir alone, that we must send a very strong message of support to them and do whatever we can. Also, I'd like to urge each and every one of you to help us, that is the Friends of Kashmir Canada, as well as Benish's group, as well as the Canadian Peace and Justice for Kashmir, or Council for Justice and Peace in Kashmir, the group, because these are groups that are doing a very important work in highlighting the struggle of the Kashmiri people. I want also to say that while Canada is not going to be able to bring about a resolution of the Kashmir dispute, as I had mentioned earlier, because Canada, for some reason, or we know what the reasons are, basically they don't want to spoil their commercial relations with India. It's a much larger power. And that is what shows, unfortunately, that the world is not governed by principles but by interests. And so we have to be cognizant of this fact, but that does not mean that we abandon our struggle, it does not mean that we should give up, because the more we strive and reach out to Canadians, it has been my experience that by and large, the Canadian people are good people. It is just that they're not aware of these situations. I'll give you an example. Back in 2014, we had presented a resolution at the annual conference of the Canadian Peace Alliance that happened to be held in Toronto. And the Canadian Peace Alliance represents something like 600 organizations across Canada, from coast to coast to coast. This included students groups, this included human rights organizations, this included labor movement groups. We presented a resolution after giving them some background of the situation in Kashmir. And I'll tell you, the vast majority of them were literally moved to tears. They didn't know that these kinds of horrible things were happening in Kashmir. And so as a consequence of that, we had started to work with the Canadian Peace Alliance and the Toronto Coalition to Stop the War, etc., much earlier, but it ultimately gelled in, and that resolution was passed unanimously at the Canadian Peace Alliance annual convention in Toronto. For the first time, that Kashmir issue was brought into the mainstream, and Canadians pledged to support it. And so we need to continue to make these kinds of efforts so that we can mobilize public opinion in this country. And what we are working towards is, and this is something that each and every one of us can do, and that's as follows. Number one, we need to boycott Indian products and goods. Sister Binesh had talked about boycotting Bollywood. I have boycotted Bollywood since 1971, when I was a young student in England. Because of the war between India and Pakistan and the tragedy that occurred, I pledged that I'm not going to watch any Bollywood movies. And of course, nowadays, you can boycott a country's goods, and this can have an impact on their economy. And this is something that I think each and every one of us can do. Secondly, and I can share this with you, we are working with various labor movement groups in Canada. Although we have not been 100% successful, but there are a number of labor leaders and lawyers, human rights lawyers, that are working with us. And we are aiming to see if we can convince those major labor groups, particularly the ones that are referred to as longshoremen, the ones that unload goods from ships. If we can convince them that they should stop unloading Indian goods in Canada, and perhaps their counterparts in the United States, if we are able to do that, it is going to have a major impact on India's economy, because if you look at the statistics, India exports something like 87 to 90 billion dollars worth of goods to the United States every year. It exports something like 42 billion dollars worth of goods to Canada and a number of other countries. I think you can make a dent in India's economy if we are successful. But what this would require is, of course, a collective effort on our behalf so that we can convince these people, and there we will need your help and your support. And also, as we come to the conclusion of this program, I also want to mention to you that earlier, as I had mentioned, we had these petitions that we have launched with the Subcommittee on Human Rights in Parliament, as well as the Subcommittee on Human Rights in the Senate. We are in touch with some parliamentary members, although in the Parliament, the committees have not been formed because the Parliament hasn't been called yet. But we are still working with some MPs as well as with some senators. And there, again, we will need your help and support. Everything counts. And I think, people like Sister Shagufta, Sister Binesh, and Brother Farhad Butch, etc., they can be very, very helpful if we get a hearing over there, that they must go and present because their voices are considered far more authentic than my voice. I'm not from Kashmir. So they turn around to me and say, well, you're not from Kashmir, so what do you know about it? No matter how qualified or well informed I might be, but it is basically our Kashmiri brothers and sisters whom we want to go before these committees to present their personal experiences, to tell these senators and to tell these parliamentarians that this is what is happening in Kashmir. But on our part, on the general level part, I think we need to do our part as well. Boycott their goods, stop buying their products, and help us to campaign for labor movements to basically really hit India where it hurts, in their pocket. I know that, when there was apartheid in South Africa, a lot of, these labor movements actually joined the campaign, and they basically stopped unloading South African goods coming to European countries and so on, and ultimately it resulted in the collapse of apartheid. The same thing happened incidentally in the 70s in Chile, when there was a military coup and people basically launched campaigns to stop unloading goods from Chile, which exports a lot of grapes and wine and all kinds of things. And it basically led to the collapse of the economy over there. So I think we can carry out a campaign, a campaign of boycott, which is called boycott, divestment, and sanctions. Although we won't be able to get sanctions against India, but definitely we can boycott Indian goods, and that, I think, is going to have a significant effect on their economy. And this is something that we really, each and every one of us can do, even without leaving our homes. So, or when you go to the stores, don't buy their goods. There are alternative sources available, and I think this would have an impact. So once again, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining us this afternoon. I hope that you will continue to join us. We are hoping to be able to organize our next program, which will be in February of 2022. Again, another event, and we hope that by then the situation would have opened up considerably so that we can invite a lot more people. We have always had, alhamdulillah, big events about Kashmir in this hall in the past, but over the last 2 years we had to, keep the things low. Or couldn't even hold physical meetings because of these restrictions, etc. But we hope that these restrictions would be lifted and we'd be able to do a lot more than what we have been able to do before. So once again, thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.